The desperate call for help. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless civilizations, each with its strengths and secrets. Among them were the Villari, a peaceful and intelligent species known for their advanced technology and scientific achievements. They had thrived for centuries on their beautiful homeworld, Villar Prime, a planet of shimmering oceans and floating cities. The Villari were scholars, not warriors, and they took pride in their diplomacy and knowledge-sharing across the stars. But peace is a fragile thing. One dark day, the Villari received an ominous message from the Kraith Dominion, a fearsome race notorious for their brutal conquests. The Kraith demanded complete submission, promising destruction if the Villari refused. Despite their advanced technology, the Villari knew they couldn't withstand the Kraith's military might. They were a race of thinkers, not fighters. The Villari High Council, desperate to save their people, decided to send out a galaxy-wide distress call. The message was simple but urgent. This is Villar Prime. We are under attack by the Kraith Dominion. We seek allies. Any civilization willing to aid us will have our eternal gratitude. Time is short. Please, help us. The message echoed across the galaxy, reaching distant planets and far-flung colonies. Days passed, but the silence was deafening. The Kraith were feared by all, and no one wanted to face their wrath. The Villari began to lose hope as their planetary defenses started crumbling under the relentless attacks. Then, unexpectedly, a response came. The Villari communications officer rushed into the council chamber, eyes wide with disbelief. "A reply," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. The council members leaned forward eagerly as the officer played the message. "This is Commander Harris of the United Earth Fleet. We've received your call for assistance. Humanity will stand with you." The room fell silent. The Villari counselors exchanged uncertain glances. Humanity. The humans were a relatively new species on the galactic stage, known more for their boldness than their strength. They lacked the advanced technology of older civilizations and had no reputation for military power. Could they really help against the Kraith? Still, the Villari couldn't afford to be choosy. They sent back a message, thanking the humans and providing their coordinates. Days later, the Villari sensors picked up approaching ships. The alien council gathered at the observation deck, expecting to see massive, imposing vessels. Instead, they saw a small fleet of human ships. Their designs were simple, almost outdated, with none of the sleekness or size that the Villari were used to. The lead ship, Resolute, hailed them. Commander Harris appeared on the screen, his uniform crisp and his expression calm. He introduced himself and his crew with confidence, but behind their professional demeanor, the Villari could sense the humans' daring spirit. One of the Villari counselors couldn't hold back his doubt. "Commander Harris, we appreciate your bravery, but this fleet, it seems, inadequate for facing the Kraith." Commander Harris smiled faintly, his eyes sharp. "Counselor, size doesn't win wars. Strategy does. Let us show you what we can do." The Villari didn't have much choice. Reluctantly, they allowed the humans to integrate into their planetary defense. They observed as the human fleet prepared for the battle in ways that puzzled the Villari. Instead of focusing on sheer firepower, the humans began gathering intelligence on the Kraith fleet's movements, studying their patterns and vulnerabilities. The Villari scientists were impressed by the humans' resourcefulness. Though their ships were small, they carried experimental stealth systems and specialized equipment for sabotage. The humans seemed confident, almost as if they had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. As the Kraith fleet loomed closer, the Villari's anxiety grew. They whispered among themselves, doubting the humans' ability to make a difference. Yet deep down there was a flicker of hope, a hope they hadn't felt in weeks. The final message from Commander Harris before the battle began was simple. "Trust us. We've been underestimated before. Let's make it their mistake." The Villari watched as the human fleet took their positions. Suspense hung thick in the air. The Kraith ships filled the sky like a tidal wave of destruction. Would the humans truly stand a chance? The stage was set. The galaxy was about to witness the courage and ingenuity of humanity. The arrival of the weak fleet. The sky above Velar Prime darkened as the first shadows of the Kraith fleet passed by the distant moons. Velari citizens, who once gazed at the stars with wonder, now looked up with fear. The Kraith were coming, and with them, the end of everything the Velari had built over centuries. In the heart of Velar Prime's capital, the High Council gathered in the Grand Chamber, watching the skies through the massive observation windows. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, the long-range sensors detected movement on the outer edges of the system. "It's them," one of the counselors whispered. But as the ships drew closer, the council realized something strange. These vessels were not Kraith warships. They were smaller, moving in tight formation. A second scan confirmed the source. It was the human fleet. Relief mixed with confusion. The Velari had expected something grander, perhaps a massive armada capable of standing toe-to-toe with the Kraith forces. What arrived instead was underwhelming. The ships were sturdy but unimpressive. The largest of them, Resolute, wasn't even half the size of a Kraith battleship. It was flanked by frigates and corvettes, many of which looked old and patched. Some of their hulls bore scorch marks from past battles, hastily repaired. Counselor Relic leaned closer to the screen, his tone laced with disbelief. "Is this all of them?" The human ships slowed as they entered Velari orbit. Within minutes, a transmission request appeared on the Council's display. The Council exchanged hesitant glances before accepting it. Commander Harris appeared once more, standing on the bridge of Resolute. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. Behind him, officers worked quietly, their movements precise and disciplined. "Greetings again, counselors," Harris said with a respectful nod. "We've arrived as promised." The council members hesitated. Finally, Counselor Relic stepped forward. "Commander Harris, we are grateful for your arrival, but we must be honest. Your fleet, it appears, small." Commander Harris smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "Small, yes, but size isn't everything, Counselor. We came prepared." Prepared? The Council couldn't see how. The Kraith fleet was known for its firepower, numbering in the hundreds. These human ships would be overwhelmed within minutes if they faced the Kraith head-on. Counselor Marine, one of the younger members, spoke up hesitantly. "Commander, forgive me, but how exactly do you intend to defend Velar Prime with such limited forces?" Harris didn't flinch. "By not fighting on their terms." The Velari Council exchanged uncertain glances. Marine frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Harris replied calmly, "that brute force is a last resort. We studied the Kraith. Their ships are powerful but predictable. They rely on overwhelming their enemies through intimidation and firepower. We don't plan to give them that chance." Before anyone could respond, Harris continued, "Our fleet isn't designed for direct confrontation. It's built for sabotage, stealth, and precision strikes. While the Kraith expect open battle, we'll be striking from where they least expect." The Council wasn't convinced. Counselor Relic narrowed his eyes. "And what if that isn't enough?" "The Kraith will come with full force. If you fail, it won't just be your fleet that falls. It will be all of Velar Prime." Harris met Relic's gaze without blinking. "I understand the stakes, Counselor. I wouldn't be here if I thought this was a suicide mission." The room fell silent. Finally, Counselor Marine spoke again, her voice softer. "Why help us, Commander? Other civilizations turned their backs on us. Why did humanity answer the call?" For the first time, Harris's confident mask softened slightly. "Because we know what it's like to stand alone. Humanity's history is filled with moments where we were underestimated, where we faced enemies stronger than us. We survived because we adapted and fought smarter. Velari Prime won't fall while we stand with you." Marine smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of hope. But Counselor Relic still wasn't convinced. He stepped back, folding his arms. "Very well, Commander. The fate of our people may rest in your hands. We'll see if your strategy can hold against the Kraith." As the transmission ended, the human fleet descended towards the surface. Velari engineers greeted the humans with curiosity and doubt, showing them the planetary defense systems. The humans began working immediately, modifying and reinforcing existing structures. Despite their skepticism, the Velari couldn't deny one thing. The humans worked fast, efficiently, and with absolute focus. By nightfall, the first Kraith scout ships appeared on the horizon. From the observation deck, Counselor Marine watched as the small human vessels slipped silently into position, blending with the shadows of the stars. The fight for Velar Prime had begun. Unconventional tactics begin. The night sky above Velar Prime glittered with stars, but for the Velari, those stars felt distant and cold. Somewhere out there, hidden among the darkness, the Kraith fleet advanced. The Velari defense stations tracked the incoming vessels, marking each one with quiet dread. The invaders would be upon them within hours. In the heart of the planetary command center, Velari leaders watched alongside their human allies as the Kraith approached. Counselor Relic stood with his arms crossed, his expression grim. "They outnumber us 10-1. Relic muttered under his breath. "And yet, your ships remain hidden." Commander Harris stood nearby, arms relaxed behind his back. His gaze was fixed on the tactical display, where red blips representing the Kraith moved in formation. The human fleet was barely visible, scattered like dust across the edges of the system. "They're looking for a fight," Harris said quietly. "We won't give it to them." Relic frowned. "If not a fight, then what?" Harris turned to him with a faint smile. "A hunt." As if on cue, the Kraith fleet began to fan out, their massive warships breaking formation to spread across Velari space. They were searching for the human fleet, expecting them to defend the planet directly. But the human ships didn't move. They remained distant, drifting just out of range. Counselor Marine stepped closer, glancing at Harris with curiosity. "What are they doing?" she asked softly. Harris's eyes never left the screen. "They're getting frustrated." Across the Velari capital, citizens watched nervously as the alien invaders loomed above their world. The Kraith battleships were monstrous, their silhouettes blocking out parts of the sky as they entered low orbit. They hovered there like vultures, ready to strike. But still, the human ships remained hidden. Inside the Resolute, Commander Harris gave the first command. Phase 1. Send the signal. On the outskirts of the system, a single human corvette powered up and transmitted a brief pulse of light toward the Kraith fleet. A beacon, bright and clear. The Kraith, hungry for battle, seized the bait. Half a dozen warships immediately broke formation and surged toward the signal. Counselor Relic stiffened. "You're luring them away." Harris nodded. "A little at a time. They're hunters by nature. They chase what they see." Marine smiled faintly. "And what happens when they catch that corvette?" Harris's gaze hardened. "They won't." Moments later, the corvette disappeared from the screen. It hadn't been destroyed. It had vanished, cloaking itself as soon as the Kraith closed in. Confused, the enemy ships slowed, scanning the area. The Velari Council watched in silence as the Kraith vessels lingered, unsure of their next move. Then, without warning, the first strike hit. A distant explosion rippled through the tactical display as one of the Kraith ships erupted into flames. Human stealth bombers had silently approached under the cover of Velar Prime's atmosphere, disabling the warship's engines and weapons before slipping away. Marine leaned forward. How did they get so close? Harris's smile was barely visible. They were already there. It became clear then, the human fleet hadn't been drifting aimlessly at the system's edge. They had been positioning themselves directly under the Kraith ships, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Across the skies, small explosions began to ripple through the Kraith formation. Human ships darted between the massive vessels, firing precision shots at engines, weapons, and communication systems. By the time the Kraith realized what was happening, their fleet was already fragmented. On the Velari command deck, Counselor Relic stared at the unfolding chaos. This isn't war," he whispered. "This is sabotage." Harris glanced at him. "War isn't about who has the biggest guns. It's about control. Right now, we control the battlefield." Still, the Kraith were relentless. As soon as they recovered from the surprise, their remaining warships began firing wildly into the dark, hoping to catch the hidden human vessels. One of the Velari officers turned nervously toward Harris. "They're adapting. Won't they eventually overwhelm you?" Harris's voice remained calm. "Not if we stay ahead." The next phase began. From the surface of Velar Prime, dozens of human-operated drones launched into the air, swarming the Kraith ships like gnats. They were small, unarmed, and seemingly harmless, but they were equipped with powerful signal jammers. As they approached, the Kraith vessels began to lose communication with one another. Their targeting systems flickered, leaving them blind. The Velari officers watched in awe as the battlefield shifted completely. The once terrifying Kraith ships now stumbled in confusion, unable to coordinate their attacks. It was then that the human fleet struck decisively. A squadron of corvettes, previously hidden behind one of Velar Prime's moons, accelerated toward the Kraith flagship. They moved quickly, weaving through debris and disabled vessels. By the time the Kraith noticed them, it was too late. One of the corvettes latched onto the flagship's hull, cutting into its systems with precision tools. Within minutes, the Kraith flagship's lights dimmed, its engines sputtered, and the great warship began to drift helplessly. On the command deck, Counselor Marine exhaled in disbelief. "They're winning." Commander Harris nodded, his expression unreadable. "We were never here to fight their fleet. We were here to dismantle it piece by piece." As the remaining Kraith vessels retreated, the Velari realized something else. This wasn't just a battle. This was a message. And the message was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The trap is set. High above Velar Prime, the battlefield was quiet, but tension hummed beneath the silence. The Kraith fleet drifted like wounded predators, their formations broken, ships scattered across the system. Wreckage from fallen Kraith vessels floated through the void, the remains of their once mighty force reduced to shadows. Yet, even in their damaged state, the Kraith were far from defeated. Commander Harris stood at the helm of the Resolute, his sharp gaze fixed on the glowing tactical display. The Kraith warships were regrouping, their flagship flickering back to life after the earlier sabotage. Counselor Relic paced behind him, frustration evident in his rigid posture. "They're not retreating," he muttered, watching as the Kraith vessels slowly realigned. "Your attacks crippled them, but it wasn't enough. They'll return in force, and next time, they'll be ready." Harris didn't look away from the display. "Let them." Counselor Marine stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Commander, the Kraith aren't fools. They won't fall for the same tricks twice. What's your next move?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Harris's mouth. "They won't need to." Before the council could question him further, Harris gestured to his communications officer. "Send the transmission." The officer hesitated. "To the Kraith, sir?" "Directly to their commander." A ripple of confusion spread through the Velari command chamber. Relic narrowed his eyes. "You're contacting them. Why?" Harris's voice remained calm but firm. "Because it's time they believe we're weaker than we are." The message was short and simple. "To the Kraith Dominion. This is Commander Harris of the United Earth Fleet. We acknowledge the strength of your forces. We seek terms for surrender." The words hung in the air like smoke. Relic spun to face Harris, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Surrender? You can't be serious." Harris's gaze didn't waver. "I am." Marine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Commander, are you sure this is the right course?" The Velari have placed their trust in you. How will surrendering protect them? Harris finally turned to face the council. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of certainty. The Kraith think in terms of domination. They understand fear, power, and submission. But they don't understand deception. He nodded toward the screen, where the Kraith flagship had halted, likely receiving the message. They expect us to fight to the last ship. When we offer surrender, they'll see it as weakness. But that's the trap. Marian's eyes widened slightly, realization dawning. You're buying time. Harris nodded. Exactly. While they focus on negotiating, we'll finish setting the stage. Moments later, the Kraith responded. The image of the Kraith commander filled the main display. Tall and imposing, his reptilian features twisted into a mocking grin. His scarred scales glimmered beneath the dim lights of his warship's bridge. Humans, the Kraith commander growled, his voice low and gravelly. I expected more from your kind. Surrendering already. Perhaps the rumors about your bravery were exaggerated. Harris faced the screen, his expression unreadable. The losses we suffered are significant, he said evenly. Our fleet is too small to repel you. We propose negotiations for the safety of Velar Prime. The Kraith commander leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And what makes you think we won't simply destroy you now? Harris met his gaze without flinching. Because even your wounded ships are vulnerable, and you know it. Destroying us would cost you more than you're willing to pay. The Kraith commander paused, considering his words. After a long silence, he gave a slow, predatory smile. Very well, Commander Harris. We will discuss terms. But be warned, your survival depends on how generous I feel. The transmission cut, and the Kraith ships began to shift, circling but not attacking. Counselor Relic exhaled sharply. They took the bait, but how long will they believe it? Harris stepped away from the display, speaking quietly to his officers. Long enough. Behind the scenes, the real plan. While the Kraith awaited the negotiations, the human fleet moved in silence. Small corvettes slipped between the debris fields, planting stealth mines and jamming beacons along the edges of the system. On Velar Prime's surface, human and Velari engineers worked tirelessly to convert ordinary satellites into electromagnetic pulse devices, capable of disabling nearby ships with a single burst. In the shadows, the real battle was already being prepared. The Kraith didn't realize that each delay, each diplomatic exchange, brought them closer to complete vulnerability. Marine watched as the engineers installed the final modifications. She approached Harris on the command deck, lowering her voice. Commander, what happens if they realize the truth before we're ready? Harris' expression didn't change. Then we improvise. But one thing's certain, they won't leave this system unscathed. The negotiation begins. The following day, Harris and a small team boarded a diplomatic shuttle, heading toward the Kraith flagship. Velari leaders watched nervously from the surface as the tiny vessel disappeared into the vast expanse of the enemy fleet. Inside the shuttle, Harris's team wore concealed armor beneath their uniforms. Hidden within the seams of their clothing were advanced jamming devices and handheld EMP disruptors. As the shuttle docked with the Kraith flagship, Harris's voice crackled over the comms, reassuring the Velari Council. Don't worry, he said with quiet confidence. They think they're in control. Counselor Marine clasped her hands, watching as the shuttle vanished into the enemy warship. She wasn't sure who to fear more, the Kraith or the calm, calculating humans who had come to their aid. One thing was certain, this battle was far from over. The fake surrender. The atmosphere inside the Kraith flagship was suffocating. The dim red lights lining the corridors pulsed like the slow heartbeat of a predator lying in wait. The metal walls seemed to close in as Commander Harris and his team were escorted through the ship by towering Kraith guards. Their scaled armor clinked with every step, claws tapping rhythmically against the floor. Harris's team remained calm, their expressions unreadable. Beneath their diplomatic uniforms, concealed plates of armor rested snug against their chests. Each carried hidden disruptors, small, unassuming devices capable of disabling Kraith technology within seconds. The Kraith led them to a massive chamber at the heart of the ship. There, sitting atop a throne-like chair, was the Kraith warlord, Commander Zarek. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light, scanning the humans with predatory amusement. "So," Zarek growled, his lips curling into a sharp-toothed grin. "The mighty humans, offering surrender." His gaze lingered on Harris. "Your species has spirit, I'll grant you that. But spirit breaks easily." Harris stepped forward, his expression composed. "We're not here to waste time, Commander Zarek. Let's discuss terms." The Kraith warlord chuckled darkly. "Terms? You misunderstand. I dictate the terms. You will relinquish your ships, abandon this planet, and your Velari allies will fall under our rule. That is the price of your survival." Behind Harris, Lieutenant Casey, his second-in-command, tensed slightly. Harris didn't react. Harris met Zarek's gaze steadily. "Your fleet isn't in a position to dictate much, Zarek. We've disabled a third of your ships. Destroying us now will cost you more than you can afford." Zarek's grin faltered for a brief moment, but he masked it quickly. "You gamble with lives that are not your own," Zarek hissed, leaning forward. "Humans are bold and foolish. Even if you destroy a few ships, the Kraith Dominion will rebuild. Velar Prime will burn eventually." Harris allowed a small smile to cross his lips. "Perhaps. But the question is, how many of your warships will be left standing when that happens?" The room grew tense. Zarek's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair. Finally, Zarek's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back, pretending to relax. "Very well, Commander Harris. Let's talk. A game of lies." As the negotiations began, Harris's officers subtly activated their hidden devices. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the chamber. Unbeknownst to the Kraith, signal jammers were already at work, quietly severing communications between the flagship and the rest of the fleet. Lieutenant Casey whispered into her communicator, linking with the fleet outside. "Phase 2 in progress. Keep position." On the surface of Velar Prime, Velari engineers monitored the exchange nervously. Hidden across the planet were powerful electromagnetic pulse emitters, disguised as weather satellites. With the push of a button, they could disable every Kraith ship in orbit, but they were waiting for Harris's signal. Marine watched anxiously from the Velari command center. "He's buying time," she said softly, watching the display screen tracking the human fleet. "But how long can this game last?" Counselor Relic shook his head. "Commander Harris walks a dangerous line. If the Kraith suspect anything—" "They won't," Marine interrupted. "He's already 10 steps ahead." Inside the lion's den. Back on the Kraith flagship, Harris's team observed carefully as Zarek outlined his harsh demands. It was clear the Kraith had no intention of honoring any peace agreement. Harris listened quietly, nodding as Zarek spoke, but his eyes were calculating. After 30 minutes, Zarek finally leaned forward. "You will send word to your fleet to power down. I want your ships disarmed immediately." Harris's eyes narrowed slightly. "And how do I know you won't destroy us the moment we do?" Zarek grinned. "You don't." The Kraith guards chuckled darkly, claws resting on their weapons. Harris allowed a long pause to linger, as if considering. Then, with deliberate slowness, he spoke. "Fine. I'll contact my ships." Lieutenant Casey raised an eyebrow slightly, catching the faintest flicker of amusement in Harris's eyes. She knew this wasn't surrender, it was part of the performance. Harris tapped his wrist communicator. "Resolute, this is Harris. Begin stand-down procedures." On board the Resolute, the communications officer responded swiftly. "Understood, Commander." From an outside perspective, the human fleet began to power down, lights flickering as if their systems were being deactivated. To the Kraith, it appeared as though the humans were complying. But beneath the surface, human ships prepared for something far more deadly. The turning point. As the Kraith grew more confident, Human corvettes quietly moved into formation beneath their warships. Velari satellites adjusted their orbits, preparing to unleash electromagnetic waves. Harris's voice came through the comms to his crew. "Wait for my signal. When it comes, strike hard and fast." Zarek seemed pleased, his smug grin returning. "Wise choice, Commander. Perhaps there's hope for humanity after all." Harris smiled faintly. "Perhaps." A small, subtle motion of his hand beneath the table activated the final phase. High above Velar Prime, the electromagnetic pulse emitters roared to life. A massive wave of energy surged through the Kraith fleet. In seconds, their engines sputtered and died. Lights flickered. Weapons systems powered down. The mighty warships that had loomed over Velar Prime were now floating helplessly. Before the Kraith could react, the hidden human fleet reignited their engines. Corvettes swarmed the disabled warships, targeting vital systems and disabling key components. Explosions rippled across the Kraith fleet as human forces struck swiftly, eliminating any chance of recovery. Inside the flagship, alarms blared. Zarek shot to his feet, eyes blazing with fury. "You." Harris remained seated, unbothered. "I told you, Zarek. Size doesn't win wars. Strategy does." As Zarek's guards raised their weapons, Harris's team activated their disruptors. The lights flickered once, and the Kraith soldiers collapsed, their weapons useless. Harris stood, stepping toward the enraged warlord. "You've lost, Zarek. Surrender your remaining forces, or we finish this." Zarek's glare burned with hatred, but he knew the truth. His fleet was in ruins. Velar Prime belonged to humanity now. The final blow. The Kraith fleet drifted in orbit like wounded beasts, their engines silent, their once glorious warships reduced to floating debris. The electromagnetic pulses from the Velari satellites had left them paralyzed, and the humans wasted no time seizing the moment. From the surface of Velar Prime, the citizens watched in stunned silence as the sky above flickered with distant explosions. Velari children, who had cowered in underground shelters, now stood in awe as the terrifying Kraith ships began to break apart. In the heart of the Velari capital, Counselor Marine stood before the vast tactical display, her eyes locked on the unfolding battle. Around her, Velari engineers and officers whispered in disbelief. "Is this really happening?" One of them murmured. "It is," Marine replied softly, though even she could scarcely believe what she was witnessing. "The humans are winning." Beside her, Counselor Relic crossed his arms, his voice heavy with lingering doubt. "They haven't won yet. The Kraith are wounded, but not defeated. A cornered beast is the most dangerous." Marine nodded, knowing he was right. The Kraith wouldn't go quietly. The enemy regroups. On board the Kraith flagship, Commander Zarek paced furiously across the command deck. Sparks flickered from damaged control panels as his engineers struggled to restore power. "Report," Zarek barked. His officers scrambled, their movements frantic. "Our weapon systems are offline," one of his lieutenants growled. "Engines are operating at minimal capacity. Shields are down." Zarek's claws tapped against the console, his eyes narrowing. "And the humans?" "They're closing in, Commander. Corvettes are flanking us from the starboard side." Zarek's eyes flickered toward the viewport. The human fleet was advancing, but cautiously. They knew the Kraith still had teeth. He let out a low, dangerous growl. "Send a signal to the fleet. Regroup around the flagship. We make our stand here." The Kraith ships, though damaged, slowly shifted position, gathering like wolves around their leader. Even crippled, they were still formidable, and the humans would need to tread carefully. The human counterstrike. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Harris stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the Kraith fleet assembling around Zarek's flagship. His officers worked quietly around him, their focus absolute. Lieutenant Casey approached, arms folded. They're pulling their ships together, trying to protect the flagship. Harris didn't look away from the display. "Good. Let them." Casey raised an eyebrow. "You're not concerned." Harris finally turned to her, a calm smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "They're making it easier for us. By clustering together, they're limiting their mobility. We'll finish them with precision strikes." He tapped the console, highlighting key sections of the Kraith formation. "Focus fire on their rear engines and communication hubs. Keep them blind and immobile. And prepare boarding teams." Casey hesitated for a moment. "You're boarding the flagship?" Harris nodded. "We take out Zarek personally. The Kraith follow strength. If he falls, they scatter." Casey smirked faintly. "Risky move, Commander." Harris's eyes glinted. "The best ones always are." The assault begins. The human fleet surged forward, engines blazing as they closed the distance. Stealth bombers weaved between the Kraith ships, delivering targeted strikes to engines and weapon systems. The Velari watched from the surface as the sky erupted into brilliant flashes of light. On board the Resolute, Harris's voice echoed across the comms. "All boarding teams, prepare to deploy." 3 human dropships launched from the fleet, slipping through the debris and docking onto the crippled Kraith flagship. Within moments, human Marines breached the hull, advancing with military precision. Inside the Kraith flagship, the interior of the Kraith warship was dark, the hallways illuminated by flickering emergency lights. Harris led the boarding party, his weapon drawn as he advanced through the corridors. Behind him, his Marines moved silently, sweeping the area with trained efficiency. "They'll be expecting us," Lieutenant Casey whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. Harris nodded. "Let them expect us. We're not here for subtlety." As if summoned by his words, a squad of Kraith soldiers emerged from the far end of the corridor, weapons raised. The humans didn't hesitate. Harris gave a sharp command, and his Marines opened fire. Bright flashes lit the corridor as the Kraith fell one by one. The team pressed forward, navigating through the labyrinth of corridors until they reached the command deck. The final confrontation. The doors to the command chamber slid open with a hiss, revealing Zarek standing at the far end. His back turned to the humans as he stared out the viewport. "I wondered how long it would take you," Zarek said, his voice calm but laced with quiet fury. He turned slowly, his yellow eyes glowing beneath the dim lights. "Humans, always so bold." Harris lowered his weapon slightly but didn't holster it. "The battle's over, Zarek. Stand down." Zarek chuckled darkly. "I've survived wars that ended civilizations, Commander. Do you think I fear you?" "I don't expect you to fear me," Harris replied. "But I know your crew does. Look around, Zarek. They're beaten. This war ends today." Zarek's gaze flicked to the consoles, where the remaining Kraith officers stood frozen, uncertain and afraid. For a moment, Zarek seemed to consider his options. His claws tapped rhythmically against the metal railing, the only sound in the chamber. Then slowly he lowered his head. "Perhaps," he growled, "you are not as weak as I believed." He stepped away from the console, signaling his surrender. Aftermath. The surrender of Zarek shattered the Kraith's morale. Across the system, Kraith ships powered down, surrendering to the human fleet. On Velar Prime, celebrations erupted in the streets as news of the victory spread. The Velari, who had once viewed the humans with doubt, now regarded them with awe and gratitude. Counselor Marine stood beside Commander Harris as they watched the Kraith ships being escorted away. "You saved us," Marine said softly. "How can we repay humanity for this?" Harris's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Just remember this, Counselor. The next time humanity is underestimated, it will always be someone else's mistake. The weakest fleet's victory." The aftermath of the battle rippled across the galaxy like the quiet aftershock of a distant earthquake. The once mighty Kraith fleet, reduced to floating wreckage and humbled prisoners, drifted under the watchful gaze of humanity's weakest fleet. On Velar Prime, the skies were clear for the first time in weeks. The distant glimmer of human ships still lingered, but this time they stood as silent guardians rather than a last line of defense. In the Velari capital, the High Council gathered in the Grand Chamber, their usual air of composure replaced with quiet awe. Councillor Marine stood by the observation window, watching as human engineers assisted Velari crews in dismantling the remains of Kraith warships. "It's strange," Marine said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "They came with so little, yet they achieved what we believed impossible." Councillor Relic, standing beside her, shook his head slowly. "I doubted them from the beginning," he admitted. His voice carried the weight of guilt and lingering disbelief. "I thought their arrival was desperation, a refusal to admit defeat." Marine turned to face him, offering a faint smile. Perhaps it was. But desperation, when combined with resolve, becomes something else entirely. Relic's gaze drifted to the human fleet. "And what do we become if we underestimate them again?" Before Marine could respond, a soft chime echoed through the chamber as a transmission request appeared. The humans were calling. Commander Harris's face materialized on the screen, standing aboard the Resolute's bridge. His uniform was stained with scorch marks, but his expression was calm and composed. "Counselors," Harris greeted, nodding politely. "I wanted to inform you that the last of the Kraith warships have been neutralized. Their remaining forces have either surrendered or retreated from the system." Councillor Relic stepped forward. "Your fleet, what remains of it, that is, has achieved the impossible, Commander. The Velari people are in your debt." Harris shook his head. "No debt, Counselor. Humanity doesn't fight for reward." Relic furrowed his brow. "Then why? Why answer a call for help that others ignored?" Harris's gaze hardened slightly, though his tone remained soft. "Because the Kraith never stop at one world, Counselor. If Velar Prime fell, others would follow. Humanity's history has taught us one thing: evil thrives when good men do nothing. We weren't about to let that happen." Silence followed his words, heavy and unspoken. Marine broke the quiet. "The Velari would like to extend an offer, Commander. To form an alliance. Your fleet may be small, but your tactics have proven invaluable. Together, perhaps we can prevent the Kraith from ever returning." Harris smiled faintly. "I'll relay your proposal to the Terran Council, but I believe they'll see the wisdom in that." Before the transmission ended, Marine spoke again. "Commander, one question, if I may." "Of course." She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Was it always your plan to send such a small fleet? Did you know this would work?" Harris chuckled softly. "Let's just say, we believed in our strengths. But if we had failed, well," his gaze shifted slightly, and a hint of humor touched his voice, "we would have sent the real fleet." Marine blinked, caught off guard. "Real fleet?" Harris's eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. "This wasn't humanity's strongest armada, Counselor. It wasn't even our second or third. The Resolute and its companions. They're part of our Outer Defense Patrol, one of the oldest fleets in service." Relic's eyes widened. "You mean to say, this was your weakest force?" Harris nodded. "The weakest." For a long moment, Marine and Relic exchanged looks of stunned disbelief. The ships that had dismantled the Kraith's war machine, the fleet that had brought an empire to its knees, wasn't even humanity's strongest. Marine shook her head with a quiet laugh. "I see now why the Kraith never stood a chance. The shadows of victory." Days later, the humans began their departure from Velar Prime. The Velari gathered in droves to watch their small fleet ascend into the sky, leaving behind a world that had been forever changed. As the last human corvette disappeared into the stars, Marine stood once more at the council chamber's window. "They came as strangers," she whispered, watching the faint trails of their engines, "and left as legends." Relic stood beside her, his tone thoughtful. "Do you think we'll see them again?" Marine smiled faintly. "I believe so. And when we do, I hope it's as allies, not saviors." Epilogue. The whispered warning. Far beyond Velar Prime, in the cold expanse of space, the surviving Kraith warships limped back to the Dominion's core worlds. Warlord Zarek sat in the shadows of his command chamber, his claws drumming slowly against the armrest. He stared at the reports flashing before him, the losses, the destruction, the humiliation. His eyes narrowed. "Humans," he hissed under his breath. A subordinate approached cautiously. "Commander, what shall we report to the Dominion Council?" Zarek's gaze hardened. "Tell them this: humanity is not to be trifled with. We mistook them for prey, but we were the ones hunted." He leaned forward, eyes glowing with vengeful fire. "But this isn't over." As the Kraith warship disappeared into the black void, one truth echoed across the galaxy. The humans had won the battle, but new storms were already gathering. And humanity, as always, stood ready.